And we're back. So welcome to Module 5, which is tying up our application back together with MongoDB, or sorry, with Angular.js and our Express backend. So we're putting everything together in this one, right?
That's right. And let's just take a couple of moments to actually go through and make those API calls and get a reminder what the backend looks like.
Yeah, so in the last module, I guess we didn't actually fully get working this little arrow on our box. So if you just look at my box really quick, you'll see that we can create a request to our localhost API. This is all backed by MongoDB. It's the same implementation we had before. There's actually no functional difference. So it's just the application's hanging on the console. So here we can grab the API post. We're already authenticated. So we just simply do a application JSON post with a text field of like, this is a cheap, and your username that you're actually tweeting for. And we can just do like, this is a cheap 2, for example. Send that. We get a response of the object that we sent, which was, hey, this is API cheap number 2. And if we do a get, we'll get all the cheaps that are in the database, which is, see, this is API cheap, this is API cheap 2. And we know the user that cheaped for it, so we can actually front that with the front-end database. And we could start tying everything together. So pretty exciting, right?
Yeah, it is. So let's start off by actually putting in our Angular views, or putting our Angular views, right, into actually our server. So we're going to go in and we're going to actually go through to this Module 5 start folder. So this is pretty much what Stephen left us off with last time, with some minor changes that I'm going to show you now. So in the beginning of the module, Stephen actually went through and, sorry, I'm going to close all of these so you're not distracted by them. And so Stephen actually went through in the beginning of this module, and this is module 2. I want module 5. I'm just going to minimize these. He went through and he actually deleted the routes.index here and also this. I just went back and I added in one tiny route. I kept it separate from his, to keep things pretty clearly delineated. And what it basically does is it gets our home page at just basically the root.
How does it know that it should use that route? Like when we start up the application?
Well, when we start up, you mean when we're starting up the application, how does it know to basically go to here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. You'll see in our app.js that we're basically saying, so we're routing this like we're routing anything else that we've done before, except all we're doing is we're saying, hey, just go to this thing here.
Oh, so because it's at the root.
Exactly.
So if I go to www.awesomechirpapp.com,
yeah,
that's where it'll load.
Yeah, exactly. And all we're doing is we're saying, hey, if you're going to the root, so you'll notice we don't have any sort of parameters either side of that, then we'll just automatically get this index.ejs that we have in our views folder. And that's something we're in the completed folder. We want to be in the start folder. And that's something that is just, I just generated. It's a really plain HTML page. So right now, if we actually go through and we run our application with npm start, we can go to our localhost 3000, and it will just display that tiny hello page. So in this case, we're just making, at first, an extremely simple front end that just says nothing except hello, and it's, as you could tell, not actually an Angular app. Now we're actually going to start porting over sort of our Angular features in. And before we start doing that, we're going to make a single page application. So when we last left off, I'm going to now go into our just module 2. We had a couple of folders. We had, the login, we had a login page, a main page, and a register. .html. And all we're going to do right now is we're going to start pulling these into our other app. Oh, I'm also in the wrong folder here. I started hesitating because I was like, this is not what I left off with.
Yeah.
Yeah, OK. So here. So we left off with this, and we actually left off with some, just nice but separate pages. And now what we want to do is we want to make them into a single page application. You can again follow along in the README for module 5. Or actually, no, this was back in module 2 because we're still leaving off with the single page application stuff. So if you get confused, like I just did, and you want to know more about the routing and creating a single page application, go to the end of Module 2.
So we didn't finish up what we needed in Module 2, so we're finishing up just a single page part and continuing with the routing and putting everything together.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to do some of that front-end routing, and we're going to start creating an app with multiple views. In order to do that, we're going to use the ng route module, and we're going to basically detect the URL that a user is on and display an appropriate template on the page without actually navigating, although it'll look like we're navigating because it'll change the URL on the page. So the first thing we need to do is actually to create some partials of the page. So whereas before we had 3 separate pages that we'd render separately, and they all had to call out and get the JavaScript sources and the CSS style sheets, now we're only going to make a tiny partial of the page that only contains basically the snippet of that page that is the most relevant and does that purpose. So for the login registration pages, for example, that would just be purely the form and nothing else. So let's actually go through and create our partials. Creating partials is actually pretty simple because all you're doing is you're stripping away the stuff that you have. So I'm actually going to, in order to run this, I'm actually just going to copy these into the public folder of our Module 5. I'm going to really quickly make sure and check that I'm in the directory that I want to be in. Yep, desktop, start. And I'm going to just paste all the files that we created before in Module 2 into the public folder for now. And this is also how we're going to start actually hosting our application. So once we have all these files, let's go through and actually edit each one. In Start, in Public, you'll see we have these 3 files here. And what we're going to do is we should just start stripping this stuff away. We're going to strip away basically everything that's up here and everything that's down here, until we're left only with the form. And you might have noticed that we're actually also even taking away that controller part.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a little bit. We're going to do the same for our main. I'm going to strip away everything here, and I know I'm going to miss one div here or there.
You can check. Mine will match them for if you just look at.
Yeah.
I think you're missing one there. 2, yeah. One more.
Actually, you know what? I don't even think I need this. I think I just need the clear fix.
You're the boss.
I mean, if the idea is to make our partials as small as they need to be, then smaller is better, I think.
Ah, okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm going to also strip away this for the register page. Now, before I just go ahead and delete all these, I'm actually going to go and create basically a base template page. And in this base template page, I'm going to need to require all those scripts again. So instead of deleting them as a whole, I'm actually going to just copy them in here. Actually, I'm going to copy this entire thing. I'm going to paste it in here for now, and I'm just going to delete the form part of it, or this entire middle div. And in login, and then in register, I am going to strip away everything except for the form. So I know that was a little bit of a hectic process, but I hope you understand what I mean. We're basically transforming our previously pretty large HTML files into just these simple partials that only contain the exact parts that we need.
So instead of repeating the poll for pulling in Angular.js and pulling in the CSS, you're just going to do it once and I guess pull a Houdini and switch the pages without switching the pages? What are you doing?
I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna do. So this is going to be our base that everything else is going to sit in. And in here we're going to call an ng view or div ng view. And in a little bit, we're basically going to say, hey, all the other stuff, as we need it, we're going to insert that stuff into basically this ng view div. So I'm going to save this as index.html here. OK, so now that we have that, oh, no, I'm still in my demo. Just wanted to make sure I didn't have more slides I wanted to show you guys. So now that we have this ng view here, well, we'll also need to kind of start adding that routing in our controller. So in order to add routing to controller, let's go in and look at our.
Are these the same kind of routes in Express?
Yeah, so I mean, the routing actually works pretty similarly as the way that it does in Express, except we're kind of faking things here. So we're going to, in a moment, I'm going to show you how I'm going to do the routing. But basically, the routing here, it doesn't actually go to these different endpoints. It'll detect what URL you're at, and it'll automatically show you that page in the view, but it's not going to go to a different link. So I think as a user, you'll see this routing work, and it'll basically seem kind of like what it's doing in Express. So let's start by doing our routing. The first thing we're going to need is we're actually going to need one dependency. We're going to need ng-route. And I think I need to put these in braces. So ng-route isn't something that's actually included in with the typical Angular package. So we actually need to pull this down from our CDN and into our index here as another script. Now, I've added this somewhere here, and I'm just going to copy and paste this in.
Is that because there could be more than one router for Angular? Or?
Yeah, so Angular actually has a couple of different routers. The ng-route is one that is standard with Angular. But there's also another quite popular one called UI route, and it has a couple more features. But I just want to stick with the basics for today. Whatever Angular says is there, that's what we're going to use, and not get too fancy. So I'm just going to paste that in under here before chirp apps, of course. Wait, I don't want to. I'm sorry. I don't want to purchase that license right now. Apologies, everyone. And I'm actually going to go back and so this is what we're going to do. We're going to create routing similar to this. So I'm going to paste this in, and then I'll just describe this because I think it's so much clearer once you actually see this in action. So what we're doing now is we're actually going to use route provider, which is how Angular actually decides which or what happens when a user goes to a URL and what we should display on the page. So for instance, when we just go to the root, we want the template that we're going to use to be the main HTML. And we want our controller to be our main controllers. So in that way, that's why we don't need to define the controller explicitly in our main HTML again. That's why we could strip that out. Because it's already going to know when it's using the main HTML template that, hey, we're going to need that main controller, and we're going to use that scope. And in a similar way, we're going to do that for login and also for registration. So when we hit the register or the login URL, it's going to automatically bring up either the login view or the register view as appropriate. And you'll see that we basically specified the same controller for each of those because they can share that one controller. So I'm going to save this. And I will try to run it. Now, before, in the Module 2 slides, we talked about having to use a sort of lightweight HTTP server to use this, and we weren't going to give much explanation. It's kind of fortunate that we're now doing this in Module 5 because we do have a server. We have our our Node server to actually serve out all this data statically, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do so because we'd run into cross-origin request errors.
Yeah, that just makes it simpler. I guess, but in production though, if you're actually doing this at full scale, another option is you can serve out your Angular app on the CDN, the whole app, and then just set your server to implement cross-origin resource sharing. And afterwards, you can use the same server, but spread out the application on the CDN itself to kind of reduce the workload on the server.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we can actually, so I've just ran the server with npm start. We've put everything in the public, and actually I'm going to show you where this happens in app.js. In app.js, what we're basically looking for is we're saying, so what we're doing is we're saying, hey, anything that's in the public folder, just serve that as static, and that's why all of our partials here can be viewed.
That's that middleware magic.
Yep. So now when we run localhost, this bodes not well for us.
Is it? You can try hitting the up button on. I hit the issue. I think it's the same issue I hit before. If you go to your Mongo, not your Mongo, your other window, the Node one, hit up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the same issue we had last time too. I'm not exactly sure why the PowerShell is doing that to us.
Yeah. But hey, I'm glad we can fix it now. Okay, you'll see that this is really wide, and that's because I actually took off some of the styling. So I'm actually going to add that back into the index. Luckily, I have our original styling that I know we want to use. And what we're basically missing is we were missing that column in the middle because that's what determined that form's size. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to use it in our index. And I'm just going to say, hey, make all of our content.
So everything, ng view will be all the subviews that we have, and they'll all be aligned by this. They'll all have the CSS applied to it. So every view will have the CSS applied to it.
Yeah, exactly. Because ngView is only going to be in here. So this, for those of you who aren't familiar with Bootstrap, this is basically just going to, make the content of our page be in the middle of the page and with some slight border on each side. So I'm going to run this again, and you can see this works pretty much like before. We can type in something here, say hello, chirp, and that posts. Say hello again. Wait, no, that would mean my name is hello. Chirp, and it works just as before, except now you can see we're actually serving this on localhost. We still don't have a way, though, to actually get to our login and register views. So let's take a moment and actually build that out real quick. I believe I have added the navigation just as a nice little component here. I'm going to drag this in because this is just a lot of styling to have to type in. And I trust that you guys know front-end styling quite well. So I'm going to actually just use a nav element from Bootstrap. And it's going to just make the nav bar be on the top of the page like you've seen before. You can see here I've made one link, which is also our sort of brand image. It just says chirp. That'll lead us to the root of the site. And then we'll also have a login page. We'll also have a login and register link.
So everything on index.html is what appears on every page.
Yeah, exactly. So index.html is going to be the root page that we access here. And I think it makes more sense once you actually see it in action like this. Because no matter where we go now from here, that index.html is always going to be there, and we're always at index.html. And even when we navigate to these different links, you can see that our URL is changing. But if you actually look at the requests that we're making to the server, we're only basically getting these partial views and rendering them where we set ngView. So now that we have that done and we actually see the files, we should probably make calls for API. Because even though this is technically on the server, we're still getting just basically that array of data, and every time you refresh the page, it goes away. So let's actually start calling the APIs that Steven has so graciously made for us.
Oh, I toiled over them.
You really did. That was 2 modules worth of API creation. I mean, I would be angry if I were you, if I didn't use these. So, okay, we'll exit out of these for now because, again, we've pretty much made the boilerplate placeholder functions for everything. So let's start, what should we start with? Let's start with actually getting authentication.
Yeah, because you need to auth before we can do anything.
Yeah, so we'll need some authentication to actually start getting the APIs. And for that, I have some slides. So let's talk about actually implementing and displaying that authentication on the page. So what we're going to use is we're going to use this HTTP core service from Angular. That's one thing that's already bundled with Angular. And what it's going to do is it's going to return a promise with success and error callbacks whenever you're making an HTTP or AJAX request. And you make it in this format. It's pretty straightforward. You say, hey, HTTP get some endpoint for me, and do whatever's in the success callback if that call is successful. And we can do get, you set the header, you post, put, and delete.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it had some type of method.
Yeah, I think it sets the header.
Yeah.
So we'll also need to save our authentication status. Now, I touched on root scope before, but root scope basically is a scope that's available to the entire module. And it's not great to use globals, but we're just going to use that for now to basically save our authentication. And once a user is logged in, we have access to their username, and we can display that. We show that anywhere, and we can save their authentication status for the duration of the time that they're, in that.
So it's
app.
very convenient because it's useful anywhere. So we don't necessarily, any view that we have, we can see that we have authenticated information, right?
Yeah, and we're also going to start logging out our users, as well as we're going to start showing and hiding elements based on authentication. So for example, we can make it so that only authenticated users can post, or authenticated users can see the the log out button, but unauthenticated users will be able to see the register and login button. That way, we're actually showing the elements as they're needed for the user.
Nice.
And finally, we're going to redirect the user. So we're going to check the authentication status as we're making that request. And we're going to use yet another Angular service, location, to change the URL that the user is on and redirect the user to another page as it's needed. So for example, once someone has logged in, we can redirect them to the main view and have them see the feed and potentially post something, and same for register. So with that, let's actually go through and implement our authentication. We're going to go in here in this authentication thing here, and we're actually going to start by putting in the dependencies that we're going to need. So as I said before, we're going to need root scope, and we're also going to need location. And now I'm going to go up and actually create that root scope. So I believe what I do is I do run. Actually, you know what? I don't want to do this wrong. Let me make sure.
Yeah, that's not.
Authentication. And that is going to be in module 5.
Yeah, so we're continuing now. We're actually on the README. It's the module 5 section.
Yeah. Okay, so I was close. Yeah, that actually I was doing it right.
Right.
You do run, and then you run a function, and then you say root scope here, because we're going to actually need to declare the root scope here, so we'd start making changes to it. And we're going to do. So great, and this is where we're going to put in our changes to the root scope. So much as we did for declaring the scope variables here, we're going to do the same thing and basically declare some root scope variables. So we're going to say root scope. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to set an authenticated Boolean to basically say, hey, is the user on the site right now authenticated? We're going to default that to false, of course. Change this to root scope. And we're also going to save that authenticated user's username. And we're going to call that current user and leave that blank for now. And so now, when we're actually logging in, we can set those root scope variables. I forgot one more thing. We have a lot of dependencies here. We're actually going to use HTTP as well, because we're going to be calling those HTTP authentication endpoints. I'm going to clear this placeholder data for now and say, when we're logging in, we want to make a post, and we want to make that to auth login. And we're going to actually post our, what is it called? Our user that's from the login page. So the user model here that we've created and is accessible here, we're actually going to just pass that root scope user to the login function. And we're just going to only worry about the success callback for now.
What can go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, this is a carefully choreographed demo, right? So probably not too much. Okay, so now that we've passed the scope user to the auth/login endpoint, we're in the success handler. So this is what will go into if that authentication is actually successful. And so if the authentication is successful, like I said, we want to do a couple of things. First of all, we want to set our root scope dot current user dot authenticated to true, because we just authenticated a user. We also want to set our root scope current user to be the current user's username. I'm just having a lot of trouble typing, but these are all correct things. So, so you'll see that we got the data back from this in this callback. So I'm just going to access the user variable and.
So this is the same user object that's sitting in the MongoDB database, right?
Yeah, and that's what Steven's passing back to me in that API, and that's what I'm getting here in basically the response. So I'm getting the data, that username, and I'm also going to set the location. So redirecting the user basically to our root or if this is correct. So we can do that by using location path. So, and this will just change the path in URL, and therefore, of course, also change our view. So I think this is right for login, and we're going to do the same for register. At the end of the day, these are pretty similar commands, except that one is actually registering a user, and one is logging one in. So we can do essentially the same thing. Because after a user has successfully registered, they're automatically going to be authenticated, and they're going to be logged in. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run it here. I'm going to just register a new account for myself. Hopefully this works. No errors.
Try it. Is it? Okay.
Nope, 404. You know what? I don't think the path is register. I think it's sign up.
No, it's not register. It's sign up. Yeah, you're right. I didn't even catch that.
So let's try again with the right path. Okay, awesome. And now I'm signed in. However, this is not really what we want. So now that we actually have users, being able to sign in, we should actually display that sign in somewhere. So let's actually display a signed in user up here and start hiding these login and register links. We'll also probably want to make a logout function.
Okay, so if I'm signed in, I shouldn't, depending on whether I'm signed in or not, it'll show me.
Yeah, exactly. And so first, actually, let me go make that logout function, because if you can log in, you should be able to log out.
Yep.
So similar to the way that the logout function was in that request, or is stored in the request, we're going to actually store our logout function in the root scope so that it can also be accessed from anywhere. So we're actually going to create a root scope function here. We're going to call this logout. I always have a lot of anxiety over whether I should call things logout or sign out, which I understand is not a real problem. It's just one that I'm always grappling with.
Super tough problem, Holland.
But basically, all we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, we're going to deauthenticate the user from Angular, but we also need to call that actual
So yeah, the bottom
HTTP
two
endpoint
are locally signing you out, but not actually.
Yeah, exactly. And before I forget, we'll actually also need the HTTP dependency here since we're using it. So we're going to use HTTP, and I believe it is a post?
It's a post. No, it's a get. Sorry. It is a get.
You said that, but I started typing in get. I feel like...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a get.
Okay.
I'll double check for you. I'm pretty sure.
Auth, and it's auth.logout?
Sign out.
Sign out. See, these things are difficult. We need to just ban one of those terms from the world, and then no one will get confused anymore. So I'm not going to actually use a callback for that, because I'm just going to assume that works. It is a lazy way to do it, and I'm sorry. But let's just leave that for now and start running that. Oh, we don't actually have a way to call this logout function. We should call these logout, login functions from actually our navigation, right? Because we want to be able to do those actions from anywhere. And so for that, we're actually going to edit them in index. So first of all, I am going to do what I always do when it's the HTML part. I am going to copy it in.
Yeah, nobody wants to type that.
Plus, getting HTML perfect and beautiful is just, I mean, I wouldn't call it not fun, because I love front-end stuff, but it's not.
You usually write in Jade, don't you, right?
Oh, yeah. Actually, Jade is the other templating engine that you can use with Express. We use EJS today just because it's really, I mean, you haven't really seen it in action yet, but EJS is really, really great for...
It's like embedded JavaScript, embedded C#, embedded Ruby. It's the same idea. It's just JavaScript that's embedded into HTML, which is kind of silly to think about because on the front end you do have that too.
Yeah.
But it's just Jade is a nicer way to write HTML.
Yeah. But the syntax is significantly different enough that we didn't want to throw another new thing at you when we're already doing 4 technologies.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm actually going to save this. What I did here is I have some, one thing here, which is the ng-click element, and it shows logout. So ng-click is basically whenever you click this element, you're going to run this Angular function, and we're also using basically the current user here, and we're just displaying the current user in the sign-in if one exists. So one other thing that I wanted to show is actually these ng-show directives that we're using. So this ng-show directive basically says, hey, if the user is authenticated, so if authenticator is true, then show this element. If it's false, then don't show this element.
So ng-show takes a true or false.
Yeah, it takes a true or false. And there's actually another nifty sibling of it, I guess you could say, which is ng-hide. And we can use that ng-hide on our login and register links. So ng-hide will basically hide the element if the Boolean that's passed to it is true.
Inverse, really.
Yeah, exactly. So with this, when we log in, it's not showing up. Did I save? First of all, did I save this?
This is the right file.
Oh, you know what I didn't do?
This is in the completed.
This is in the completed. I'm going to copy. I keep putting things in the wrong folder, and yeah. I'm really, really sorry.
So usually when I do it, I open up the particular directory in Sublime so I don't confuse it like that. Because you open up the whole repository. That's probably why.
I did open up the whole repository, but you saw what I did.
Yeah, we all saw it.
And
we believe
let's actually...
All right, there we go. And log in.
Right, and now you'll see up here we say signed in as Helen1. That's the username that you all just saw me use. And it shows the logout as well because these show if the user is authenticated. OK, awesome. One piece you'll see that we're still missing, though, is the actual feed that we want to show. And so that's the piece that we'll do next.
So the database is empty right now anyway, so it should be empty.
I actually populated some items in the database, because I'm sneaky, beforehand, so that when our GET request is made, we'll actually start seeing things populate on that page. Okay, so cool. I just had a couple of items in there.
So you socialized with yourself
working.
a bit on
I did, actually. You just see me say hi to myself like a couple of times. I mean, I thought about faking your name in there, but like, I don't know if you'd appreciate that. I don't know. I might have.
It's kind of creepy if you just do like, hi, Steven, and then if you do on my behalf.
Great demo, Helen. Oh, thanks. Like, I don't know. I seriously, that might have been my sample data. I'm really sorry. So the next thing we're actually going to talk about is we're going to talk about services. So services in Angular are basically, helper functions for controllers. Because what we talked about before is controllers are, what is basically massaging and bringing that data and putting it in the scope for the view to look at. But if you want to, do a lot of heavyweight requests and stuff, like even to what we just did with the authentication controller and making those requests, we typically want to put those in a service. So services organize the logic, basically, of your code instead of just logic of your code outside of just basically manipulating your models. It'll actually persist data outside of controllers if that's something that you need. So, being able to use this instead of root scope is definitely much better practice. It'll share data between your controllers, and you'll also just inject them into your controllers as you need them. So, for instance, if we had an authentication service, we'd only put that in the authentication controller because that's the only one that needs it. So there are a couple of different kinds of services within Angular. There's a factory service, which is something that we're going to use, and that basically, these are a bit complicated as concepts because they're all fairly similar. But basically, you can think of these as being the differences between the services in Angular. A factory will basically return a value to you, and you're going to receive the value that is returned. For service, you'll use that if you want to receive basically a new instance of a created object, so an object that's already created. And provider is versatile because that's sort of the grandfather object that all these other services are based off of. And that's most useful if you have an API that needs to be configured sort of before your app starts running. And if this is all too complicated for you, don't worry. We're just going to start using a factory and not worry about the rest for today.
So if you want to get more detailed information, probably look at the
look at the Angular.js docs because they go into this much, much deeper. But basically, a factory is great for reusing logic, and a service is great for sharing data. A provider is great if you need a lot more functionality or you really want to customize something. I think that's maybe a more succinct way of describing their different use cases. Okay. Another thing I want to discuss is actually resource. So Stephen alluded this a couple of times when he was creating that fully RESTful API that we're actually now going to access for our posts. But a resource is basically a really wonderful, very high-level Angular module, actually. Or no, Angular service. Angular module.
Service?
Angular module. It's a module. Angular module that allows you to not have to manually manipulate like HTTP requests like we just did. Instead, it basically, if you give it a fully RESTful endpoint, it'll say, okay, I got this. Like, give me that endpoint, and I'm just going to run whatever methods you need me to when you need me to do them, instead of you having to specify specifically, okay, on GET request for this URL, do this, on success callback, whatever else. It'll just take care of that for you. And we're actually going to see this in practice in a little bit. So first, let's start off with creating a factory to get all of our requests, or no, to get all our posts. So I'm going to put that here, and I'm just going to say app.factory, and I'm going to call this post service. You could also call it post factory, but I like that, post service, postal service. Anyways, don't let me distract you guys with my dorky things. And we're going to pass it that HTTP service because we'll need that to, of course, make our HTTP requests. And in here, we're going to create a variable called factory, and we're going to make it empty for now. And then we're going to create one function here called getAll. That's basically actually going to make those HTTP calls. And I also want, so we're going to make the HTTP call within this function. So we're going to pass this post service basically to our main controller to get stuff, or to get the posts, but we're going to define all its functions in here. So in here, we're just going to then make our HTTP call, say HTTP get, and then the endpoint is API/posts, right? And I think that's it. So we're just going to pass it basically the posts here.
Yeah, it should just be a get. As long as you're authenticated, it'll work.
And then in here, because we're going to use this post service, we're actually going to add the post service as a dependency. So we're going to leave this as being set to blank for now because we want this to actually run independently of that, and we're going to set this to, we're going to, first of all, make a call to that post service. So we'll do post to the post service.getAll. So we'll do post service.getAll. And then because, and I need to return the factory here. So in here, we're basically going, once we make this call, we're going to get a success, we're going to want to wait for its success callback.
Hold on, is the post service factory, is that accessible from any controller?
It's accessible from any controller as long as you include it as a dependency.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of these services, right? Is that you can use them in whatever controller that you need. Okay, so I'm actually going to do get all success data. And So basically, if this call that we're making is correct, we're going to set our scope.post to the data that it returned back. So if this seems a little bit more convoluted to you, I understand. And I want to explain that a little bit. We're basically doing this so that all of this is abstracted away. So if we needed posts, for instance, on another page or something, we can reuse that code quite easily. And also, if we wanted to, for instance, change the API endpoint, we don't have to go around changing that everywhere in our app. So we'll save this and see if it works. It does not.
JS debugger.
Yep. Cannot read property success of undefined. I'm probably calling that wrong.
Or if it's undefined, that means get all is returning undefined.
Get all is returning undefined. Your post service get all success function. Get all success function data.
Post.
Yeah, because this is the same as that, and
Include a post service.
Base URL factory that get all return. Oh,
that's
not what I did. I did not actually return this, so I'm just giving.
Oh,
I'm just passing it like a blank thing.
Yeah.
Whew, okay, now this should work.
There we go.
Awesome. Okay, so because we already had some data saved in our MongoDB, yeah. See, now it's actually making that call to our server and is returning back the post that we have. So that's awesome. We can see the posts that we have, but our posts mechanism still, I keep doing that. I keep typing my last name as the message that I want to send. It'll add it in here, as you can see, but when we refresh the page, it actually, doesn't show up. And that's because we're still saving that. We're adding that to the posts that we have here, but we're not sending that out anywhere. Oh, I actually want to make one last change here. Instead of having you type in your name here, let's
actually logged in.
Yeah, since you're already logged in, let's actually go ahead and show, your screen name. So because that's in our main partial, we're actually going to change that here. And instead of having you type in your name, I'm just going to do a tiny heading. It'll be the current user. It's going to say, oh, current user says. Says, yeah, thank you. Grammar. Not my strong suit. And now we actually want to manipulate our posts here. So before we do that, I want to go back and talk about the ng resource that we briefly touched on. So instead of actually having to go through and implement all of these for every single or implement another function in our factory for every single request that we're going to make, why don't we just use that ng resource? And we can actually do that really easily. It's only one line, but we need to first import that ng resource module in, similar to the way that we did that for ng route, because that's also not something that comes standard packaged with Angular. So I have the link in here somewhere, and we're going to just add that into our index.html. Save that, and also add that into our Angular module as a dependency for the entire app. This should be a comma. Okay, and now instead of having this, quite complicated factory here, we are going to just be able to delete all of that. Good exercise, though, so you guys know how it works, even though I basically typed it in and deleted it right after. And we're going to use one really simple line that I always happen to get wrong, and really actually simple line. It's surprising I get that wrong so often. And we're basically going to return it a resource that's generated by the resource module. And what it's going to do is it's going to take that entire endpoint that we have, complete with the ID, and and it's going to create all these helper functions that you'll be able to use in whatever controller that you included in. So now, first of all, instead of using the get all request that we just made, since we deleted that, we don't even need a success function, actually. All we need to do is say, hey, make scope.posts into the post serve and set that equal to the post service.query. Or, sorry, set that to what the return is from post service.query. And what query will basically, just send a get request to the API/posts and get all of our cheaps, right?
Yeah, because it knows it's a resource that could just say, hey, it's doing the get all.
Yeah, exactly. So now let's refresh the page and see if that works. It does not. What is wrong? Resource is not defined. That's because I defined HTTP up here, but I really just need...
You just need resource, right?
Resource. Yeah. And so right now, we actually need to probably hide this if the user's not authenticated. I'm going to do that next.
Yeah, you probably want to do that.
But you can see that the ng resource is working. By just using that tiny query line, we've managed to be able to get all our entire feed. So let's go and hide this forum. We'll, again, use ng-hide. No, ng-show. We'll only show the posting form if the user is authenticated. But we'll, of course, leave the post stream so that anyone can access that. Awesome. And now, actually, let's log in and make sure that works. Yep, it does. And so now when you're logged in, this...
It should be zero.
Yeah, it's showing up.
That'd be nice, too. So...
It's true.
Yeah.
OK, so now let's actually go and work on our last little bit, work on being able to post to our cheap stream, chirp stream, cheap stream.
Cheap stream.
Cheap stream. Yeah, tweet, cheap. Yeah. If we're going for a one-to-one mapping, that works.
I figured everybody's already caught on to that, right?
So yeah, let's actually go and change our post. So if you recall in our main, when the post form is submitted, it's actually still going to call that post. Yeah, it's still going to call that post function, and we'll leave that post function to itself right here. But the only difference is that we'll actually use the resource to go ahead and add something to it. So all we're going to do is we're going to say post service, and we're going to use the save function to be able to save that new post in.
So it'll secretly, like under the covers, call the API that we need to. Yeah. Because we did a RESTful implementation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
On the back end.
So since we have, how do I say this? OK, since we are using our current user instead of actually having someone type in their name, why don't we set the created by to actually the current user? So let's do that first before we call anything. We're going to call scope. We're going to say scope.newPost.createdBy. We're going to set that to the root scope dot current user. We want to make sure to actually add the root scope in here as a dependency. And next, we want to set that created at.
There's that tense error again.
Yeah, we want to set the created at to the current time. So we're going to set created at to date.now. OK, and so now that we've set up new post, we can actually go in and save it. We're going to save scope.newPost. And we're going to give this a success function as well. I spelled success wrong. And so what we want to do here, we basically want to say, well, after we've done this, first of all, we want to make sure that we clear new post again so that it's ready for another cheap. So we want to do that. And we also, of course, want to actually refresh the entire cheap stream. So we'll just go ahead and call that query again. And because of that two-way data binding, it's just going to refresh. It's just going to augment the view as we need it.
OK. So
I'll save this, and I'll run this again. you might have noticed that when we refresh the page, we actually log ourselves out. And that's because we haven't implemented sessions on the client side. But once we log in, OK, so I'll say something here. Is it because I already said hi? No, I don't think so. Inspect element. Undefined is not a function. Scope.post.
Scope.post, yeah. So scope is undefined.
Oh, where did I? Post service, scope.post. Am I creating this wrong? Good question, Helen. What was the right way for me to do it? I asked my former self. Oh, yeah. OK. OK, I see what I did. So you want to actually pass that callback in instead of doing what I did, which is calling a success. I can't find where I put in the code. OK.
That's success right there.
Yeah. And so I want to make sure that I have my indentation correct. OK, awesome. I'll save this, and I will...
It's probably refresh, right?
Yeah. I was kind of hoping that I didn't have to, you know?
Yeah, I think it loads up all those views already, so...
OK.
Say something.
I'll say something else. OK, awesome. So now that actually worked. I said one more time, and it chirped successfully, I guess. And now it's displaying in our chirp feed once again. So now that we're done with this, we've pretty much implemented all of, I think, our necessary parts. We've managed to interact with that REST API that we created in past modules to be able to authenticate our users, register new users, sign out our users, and we're also able to both get we're able to get all of our cheaps through that GET request on posts, and we're also able to write posts to it. Now, you can extend this a lot more because, again, that endpoint will allow you to access individual cheaps. It'll allow you to update them and delete them if necessary. But I think we're just going to leave this for now.
Awesome. So we've created all the basics that we need for the whole application. We're actually got it running locally. So in the next module, what we'll have, I will go ahead and figure out how to take this thing, deploy it to the cloud so that everybody in the world can cheap together.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. All right, cool. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes, and we'll show you how to get this deployment working and talk about a couple other mean stack tools, and then we'll wrap this MVA up. See you soon.